Okay, let's kick it off. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Ali Reza Vahabzadeh with the American Sustainable Business Council, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar on rethinking our way to the future we want with Jaimie Cloud, President of the Cloud Institute. Thank you all for taking the time to join today, and we're looking forward to an engaging discussion led by Jaimie, where we'll explore with our participants the cognitive frameworks, mental models that are driving unsustainable behavior that is often and paradoxically inconsistent with our values. Jaimie will explain how thinking drives behavior and behavior causes results, and what we can do about evolving our thinking. Jaimie will suggest some more accurate mental models for decision-making that can accelerate the shift towards sustainability and regeneration. We will discuss the use of brain-based strategies for helping people to reframe, reappraise, rewire towards the future we want. For those on the line who don't know the American Sustainable Business Council or are new joiners, I'd like to share that ASBC is a growing coalition of member business organizations and companies advancing market solutions and policies to support a vibrant, just, and sustainable economy. Founded in 2009, ASBC and its organizational members represent more than 250,000 businesses across the United States. ASBC's issue agenda is to advance movement toward a sustainable economy, ensuring social and economic issues, as well as environmental benefits. So with that, let's introduce our great speaker and begin. Jaimie Cloud is a thought leader in the field of education for sustainability. She has authored the Cloud Institute's EFS framework and several peer-reviewed journal chapters and articles on sustainability and the significance of education for sustainability. Jaimie works extensively with educators, administrators, and school boards across the nation. She designs and facilitates professional development programs and directs the collaborative development of numerous instructional units and courses for K through 12, higher education, and corporations designed to teach and learn across disciplines through the lens of sustainability. In addition to her commitment to furthering the mission of the Cloud Institute, Jaimie owns Miracle Spring Farms in Gallatin, New York, where her team is making goat cheese and cultivating regenerative farming practices. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jaimie. Thank you, Jaimie.
Thanks, Ali. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to start with this question. I think when we are all thinking about a sustainable future, it's easy if we just say the future we want. And of course, we all have a slightly different idea of that. But there's a lot we have in common. We'd like to still be here, and we'd like to be thriving over time. What do we want to sustain, for whom, and for how long? These are the questions we always ask in educating for sustainability. Today, we're going to focus in on what the brain science has to do with it. You know, there are many definitions. If people's eyes glaze over when you try to define sustainability, we see it as a capability to thrive over time by contributing to the social and physical systems upon which we depend. So that's one way that I like to describe it. And you're welcome to use any of these. Anybody's welcome to this PowerPoint. I know it'll be recorded, but I'm happy to send you the actual PowerPoint if you need it. John Ehrenfeld says it's the possibility that human and other life will flourish on the planet forever. Focus here on possibility, because believe it or not, there are a lot of people out there who don't know that we don't have a guaranteed seat on Spaceship Earth. So they don't know that it's even a question whether or not we'll be able to thrive over time. So that's always useful to remember. And then, of course, Dana Meadows says it's a society far-seeing enough, flexible enough, and wise enough not to shoot itself in the foot by undermining its physical and social systems of support. Makes sense, but as we all know, that's not exactly where we're headed. So why is the big question? And I've been tracking, all of you probably have seen this ecological footprint chart. It just describes sort of the gap between how much biological productivity there is on the planet versus how much we're demanding. It's one of the indicators, one of the many indicators of unsustainability. And it's something most people are not tracking. We wouldn't need education for sustainability if there was no such thing as unsustainable. clearly it's possible to get ourselves into this situation without notice. And I've been tracking the state of the planet data since I was 11 years old. I was in one of those experimental programs in global education since 1968. And like that little boy in the Emperor's New Clothes story, I have been wondering ever since then why it's so hard for people to see what's going on and turn the ship around. What is it that stops them from seeing what's happening and doing something about it? And so this presentation is about much of what I've discovered about the brain science and what we can learn about our thinking and how we can change it. Barry Richmond used to say all systems are perfectly designed to get the results they get. So if we're in this current situation and it's a current reality, then we designed for it, we bought and sold for it, we educated for it, we farmed for it by design, unintentionally, but still perfectly designed to get the results we get. And David Orr always says it's worth noting it's not the work of ignorant people, it's the work of extremely well-educated people, many of whom have advanced degrees. And those are the really smart people that are helping us head in the wrong direction. So, you know, this is a mystery. What's happening here? So what are we thinking and why are we in this situation? Dana Meadows wrote a piece called 12 Places to Intervene in a System quite a while ago. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend it. The most upstream place to intervene in the system, according to Dana, is to think about our thinking. Second most upstream place is the thinking itself. So as educators, that is our unique contribution to this field, is to think and focus on what kind of thinking we need to do to get the kind of results we want, because thinking drives behavior and behavior causes results. So that's what we're focused on. Many of you might have seen this ladder of inference. It's in the fifth discipline by Peter Senge. You see it in a lot of different organizational change literature. And it begins at the bottom of the ladder with reality, the observable data that is possible, that actually exists as if a video camera has captured it. So let's call that reality. Then we step into the picture and we choose data from where we are standing. Where we stand depends on where we sit in the system. Let's think of it that way. Then we add meanings to it, make assumptions about it, draw conclusions, adopt beliefs about the world, take actions, and of course, way up at the top are the results of our actions. And this little ladder of inference is a really nice, simple way to describe what is going on in our brains. So what happens is that the beliefs about the world that we adopt create a cognitive framework to the next that frames the next set of data that we can see from where we're standing. Look where reality is. It is outside of the box, as it were. And these are all the names on the right-hand side from a lot of different sectors and bodies of literature for this box. You can call it a cognitive framework, a mental model, a mindset. A mental map is the term that the brain scientists use. Schema, habit of mind, all the same kind of thing. Innovators would call it a paradigm. It is a cognitive framework that creates a habit, a rut, if you will, in the brain, so that we start looking at things through these frames. They form at about the age of 13 or 14. Before then, kids are trying to understand the world, trying to create a frame, but it doesn't take hold until about the age of 13 or 14. So if young people are taught that this is just a guiding construct that will change over time with new knowledge and applied insight, then they will be happy to keep that plastic and keep adjusting their frame based on the data that is around them. Lisa Feldman, who is a brain scientist up at Harvard, says our prior experiences with the world inform what we can perceive. So we tend to start seeing what we have already seen and what we believe we're going to see. It's kind of, it's very much explains confirmation bias. So we develop these frames, and unless we change them, we're going to miss an awful lot of what's going on in the world. It is a form of mindlessness. It is not stupidity. It's a state in which the brain is trapped in the past, operating out of habit. That's Ellen Langer, also from Harvard. So I would argue that this is the state in which many people are functioning all over our planet, because we are in a situation we have never been in before at a global scale. And there are an awful lot of people who simply have not processed what's going on, and therefore they can't even see the data that's right in front of them. Why? Why is it possible, and how is it possible to get stuck in our thinking to that extent? Ellen says everything that happens is reported to the brain as absolute fact. So now it's getting tricky. Peter Senge says everything is internally consistent within the frame we're operating. So it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, confirmation bias. And Stephen Jones says most people make sense to themselves. That's my favorite one. So people are operating with their frames. They think this is how the world is, and everything that happens either fits into their schema, or they can't see it, or they ignore it. So what are we thinking? What are the ways of thinking that are driving this kind of unsustainable behavior that seem to make sense at the time, but over time undermines the health of the systems upon which we depend? It's so counterintuitive. We love each other and we love life. And so here is the story of the fish game. One of the things that I do often to introduce the notion of sustainability is we play a little fishing game that is a simulation. It's adapted from Fish Banks by Dennis Meadows, and it is a little game of interdependence. And in this game, people are fishing, and the instructions are try to get as many fish as possible by the end of 10 rounds. And over again for 22 years, people overfish again and again and again, with two forms of feedback right in front of them, and but the scorecards that they're tracking the data on, and the actual fish cards on the table. They see that the numbers are going down, and they keep doing it. And I've been asking the question why for a very long time. What are you thinking? And what happens is they track the data. They track at the end of the game, I ask them to track the data. So they track the fish stocks going down, down, down. They track their individual accumulation, and they track their group accumulation. And as you can see, the unsustainable example is on the left and the sustainable example is on the right. Very rarely do we get to a sustainable example. Only 3 times in 22 years have I ever had a group not overfish even one time. And one of those groups was the Blue Man group. And so you can imagine their way of thinking. They're extremely creative. They don't even need to talk to each other because they're minds, but they work in a swarm. They are performance artists, and they don't make a move without the others making a counter move. They're also incredibly good business people. So they got it, and a couple of other random groups. But most people, the definition of insanity that you see on the left-hand side. And again, it's much more difficult when the feedback is removed in time and space and not casually observable, which is most of the results of our behavior. But even when it's right in front of us, we can't see it. It's fascinating. You can see that the group accumulation is in the red, the fish stocks are in green, and the individual accumulation is in blue. And you can also see that in the sustainable example, everybody does better. The individuals do better, the group does way better, and the fish are happy. So how do we get to that place? Most people, first of all, don't have the chart on the right on their radar as even a possibility. When you mention the word sustainability, they think unsustainable, they think problem, they think issue. They don't see that chart on the right of all the parts working well together over time. So part of it is us helping them see that new narrative and tell the story of that new narrative, because people don't believe it's possible. So here is one of the reasons. I asked again and again over 22 years, why did you do it? Why did you saw that it wasn't working, something you did or didn't do contributed to crashing the system. Why did you do it? And these are now, this next set of slides will be the classic mental models of unsustainability. Here's the Titanic. Many, many people, it's one of the most popular mental models. There wasn't enough to go around, so I got while the getting was good. And of course, if there is scarcity, then it is logical to hoard and to take too much. But the problem here is that by taking too much, you cause the very situation that you are afraid of. So this assumption of scarcity upon which our entire economic system is based is a problem. It drives hoarding behavior. Here's the bummer. The kids call these people the given ups. May none of us ever be called a given up. And in this one, people will say to me, well, I could see it was impossible. Too many people, not enough fish, it can't be done. And they'll cross their arms and they won't do anything. Because it's logical not to do anything if nothing can be done. It makes sense within that frame. Here's maximizing gains for self, a classic mental model. People will say, well, I was maximizing my gains, meeting my self-interest. Thinking to themselves, well, that's what Adam Smith said to do. That's what we learned how to do in our MBA. But they forgot the second part of the sentence, to produce the greatest benefit for society as a whole and vice versa. That is what Adam Smith said. We cannot just break down, we cannot choose the parts of the sentences that are convenient and leave out the rest. He was talking about whole to parts, parts to whole, and that is how you get to a sustainable future. But if you leave it at self-interests and don't take responsibility for the difference you make, you crash the system, contribute to crashing the system. And this is the mental model, the neoclassical model of the economy that they're operating with. This is the one still in every textbook, at least in the US, which does not include, as you can see, the value of social and human capital, and it doesn't include the value of the natural capital. Big, big mistake. Here's the social trap, another very popular one. Well, I knew what to do, but the others weren't doing it. So if they're not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. Or if everybody's taking too many, then I should take too many because that's what everybody's doing. The problem with that mental model is what's true if one person does it is not true if everyone does it. If you're studying the ecological economics theory and Bob Costanza's work, he's got a lot of great literature on the social trap. This is a very popular one. I'm doing what the other people are doing because there's no point in me being good if nobody else is being good. Well, of course, that's if you flip that and the leader does the right thing, then everybody will follow that leader. So it can work both ways. If you're a freeloader, a free rider, if you will, then everybody follows you. We're all in deep trouble. Here's the theory of confidence, another slightly less popular, but very much alive and well. Somebody else is going to take care of it. The market, the technology, the government, somebody else. I don't have to worry about this. It's not my job. That one shows up a lot. It's only a game. And now, of course, in this particular situation, it is an actual game. We're playing a simulation. In that movie, The Big Short, it was not a game, although they played with people's lives as if it were a game. So I think we need to be really clear about whether we are playing a game and testing the parameters or whether we're not playing a game. Here's greed. Of course, it shows up in every group. It is not the predominant mental model of unsustainability, contrary to popular notion. There's usually one or two in a crowd that really don't care about anybody else. I think these people had an unhappy childhood, the real ones, not the ones that just act greedy in the game. But real greedy people seriously have a problem. So we need to help them. We certainly don't want to make them our leaders. This is another really interesting one. Most people, when they think of a game or any sort of competition, they think of a zero-sum game, which is the kind of game in which there are winners and losers, and those are the only two choices. And if those are the only two choices, everyone will choose to play to win. In fact, there are thousands of different kinds of games, one of which is the non-zero-sum game. And in that type of game, for anyone to win, everyone has to win because the players are interdependent upon one another. I would argue that this big enchilada game of life lends itself more to the non-zero-sum game because we're in the context of interdependence. But most people have never even heard of a non-zero-sum game. So they don't understand the rules, they don't understand the goal. We need to make sure that people understand what kind of game are we playing. And even if we want to introduce competition into a non-zero-sum game and get your country or your state or your company to be the leader and be the first person to get to a sustainable future by work in the context of interdependence. Here's the anthropocentric. Hardly anybody says that they're the anthropocentric, but the kind of thing they will say is that, well, I was thinking about what I needed, what I was going to do, what you were going to do. Nature wasn't even on their radar. They have in that game the replenishment rate, the carrying capacity. They can see how many fish are in the sea. They can see the number of players. But they never use the data from nature to inform their decisions. And we see this in reality all the time. All of these mental models, if you look to the literature and you look to what's going on in the world, they translate every day in every context. So these are the operating schema. These are the mental models people are operating with out there. And if nature's not even on your radar, then whatever information it is telling us, you can't see it. It's just fascinating. Everything is substitutable. It's something a lot of people learned in school. Turns out not to be actually true, but people will say to me, well, I fished a lot, I made a lot of money fishing, and now I will open up a furniture store. Well, furniture stores are not fish, and everything in an ecosystem has an important niche with many tasks. Things are not substitutable. Only on TV, like in TV shows like Wife Swap, where you can put a mother in somebody else's home, is this true. And even at that, it's not true. So this is absolutely not valid, and does not take into consideration the notion of niche and the unique contribution that each species and each element of an ecosystem plays. And here's the control freak. These people will genetically modify their fish or create fish farms or do anything because they ultimately believe that they are in control and that they can control nature and people and each other. And there is no such thing as control in a complex system. You can manipulate, you can interact, you can reciprocate. Control is not on the menu. It is a perception, and so I will always offer to people, you're not really giving it up because you don't really have it. Get over it. And of course, some people aren't thinking at all. That definitely happens. So here is a great little systems thinking joke. Some of you may have seen this before, but it sort of sums up what we're working with. The irony here is that if you cut that boat in half, you don't get two boats. It's one boat, and we're all in it. And no matter where you are on that boat, we need to be working together to turn that ship around. The results of being stuck in our thinking are that we often operate without the information we need. We're ignorant, and we don't know what we don't know. And so we're not questioning that. We ignore or literally can't see the feedback that's right in front of us. We call it believing is seeing. Not seeing is believing, but quite the opposite. And this is what Kevin Oxner at Columbia University says. He explains it this way. If we cannot hear or see the feedback, we cannot perceive relevant data for our brains to filter. This answers the question I've been asking since the 6th grade. Why can't people see this data? Why aren't they doing anything about it? Because their frame literally prevents them from seeing what they've never seen before, and they literally are blinded to it. It's just fascinating. I know it's hard to believe, but this is brain science. We exhibit characteristics of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And or our solutions backfire on us. So the very thing we do to solve our problem, the quick fix, if you will, comes back to bite us. It actually undermines our ability to get where we want to go. Or we treat symptoms, which works in the short run, but then we make our problems worse over time and create new problems. And I'm sure those two things sound very familiar to all of you because we do really well at that last one. Or we can identify the most upstream place in the system, to address the most upstream problem, and then for every solution, get win-win-win results. So every problem, every solution should solve more than one problem at a time and minimize the creation of new problems. That's a Wendell Berry quote. So here we are. We've got all these ways of thinking that are driving unsustainable behavior. Things are changing. If it's living, it's changing on this planet, and we are going to need to adapt and evolve, and we are going to need to learn our way out of this. And we are going to need to reframe and rethink how we're operating on this planet so that we can get to that future we want. The past is not a predictor of the future. We have to change with the times. This is just a wonderful example of how this is not the first time we've ever had to do it. This is a depiction in Genesis of how the world works and where space is and how everything is configured. And Ptolemy came along and said, no, we're in the middle and everything revolves around us. And clearly there are many people who haven't gotten over Ptolemy's way of looking at the world. And then finally we have Copernicus, who through the math realizes, nope, it's not all revolving around us. We are all revolving around the sun. And of course, there are still people who belong to the Flat Earth Society who don't see life this way, but they do not get navigation licenses. And that is important to remember. The rest of us need to go with the most up-to-date current information so that we can operate and increase our ability to understand what's going on around us so that we can adapt and work our way towards the future we want. And as Einstein used to say, the significant problems we face cannot be solved with the same thinking we used to create them in the first place. So it all begins with a change in thinking. So what is that different way of thinking we need to be doing? Now, as it turns out, I grew up to become a global educator, and then in 1987, heard the word sustainability for the first time, read about it in the Our Common Future report, and realized I was tracking unsustainability. We didn't have that language up until that point. And I thought, well, sustainability seems like a better idea. What is it, and how do you educate for that? What do we need to know? What do we need to be able to do in order to thrive over time? And what do we need to change? So the definition of shifting people's mental models, which again is the most upstream place to intervene in people's thinking, it's an altering of schema. It is definitely a rewiring and altering of the cognitive framework. It's the tapping into the plasticity of our thinking. And it's a result of new knowledge, new information, new experiences, applied insights, new cognitive connections, new synapses. They're all formed and new schemas are developed that are in keeping with closer and closer to reality. And the goal here is to increase our understanding. All we can ever do is close the gap as much as possible between our perception of the world and the actual world. We're never going to get it quite right as individuals, but together we can each see a different part of the elephant and put all of our views together and try to get as close to a holistic understanding of what's going on in the world as possible. So here, how do we shift mental models and what do we need to know about it? We cannot unwire our brains or anybody else's brain. You cannot not think about something. You can't stop thinking about something. What you can do is think about something else. We can rewire our brains. We can, the brain scientists call it reappraisal or reframing. So it's not doing something, it's doing something different. Educators call it accommodation. Piaget used to say, if you learn something that fits into your existing schema, he called that assimilation. But if you are required to shift your frame in order to understand that new information, he called that accommodation. That is largely what we are asking people to do as a starting point to understanding what the heck we're talking about when it comes to sustainability. So when rewiring and reframing and reappraising, we can exercise our free won't and make choices about what we're not going to do so that we can exercise our free will to think differently. So we need to choose to reframe and think differently, think out of the box, if you will. But that's what we can do. We can't not think, and we certainly can't ask somebody to not think the way they do, but we can create favorable conditions for them to evolve their thinking and to offer them ways of thinking differently. And I'm going to share with you some of the mental models of sustainability that we'd like people to get to, the antidotes, if you will, to the mental models of unsustainability. And then I'm going to share with you some strategies for how do you help people move from being stuck in one that is not driving that's driving unsustainable behavior to some of these more updated ways of thinking that can get us to a sustainable future. So this is the first one. It's a system, so there's no beginning or end. We start with their favorable conditions, and in a PowerPoint slide, you have to start somewhere. So I like this one as a starting point because it just starts with the assumption that it's possible to turn this big spaceship Earth around. It's the opposite of the bummer. The easiest way to get somebody from the bummer to it's possible is storytelling, but I'll get into that in a little bit. So if people assume it's possible to do whatever it is we're asking them to do, their first question is, how do we do it? It's much better than it's impossible and there's nothing to do. So at least we get some movement if people are assuming that it's at least possible. Here's another one. This one is fascinating. Live by the natural laws, the physical laws of nature. The first law of thermodynamics, all the biological principles, ecological principles, the actual operating instructions for Spaceship Earth, as Bucky Fuller would say. We have to operate within them. We don't have a choice. They're not negotiable. And yet, 2 out of every 1,000 people I speak to remember any of them. So I always ask people, what's the first law of thermodynamics? 2 out of 1,000 people can answer the question. And of course, that's the one that says that matter and energy don't appear or disappear on this earth. They cannot be created or destroyed. In other words, there is no such place as a way. So we are throwing things to a fictional location every day. People don't know that. They don't know why they're being asked to recycle. I know it sounds crazy, but they don't. They don't get it. And so we need to help them understand things can't go anywhere. There's never going to be new molecules except for the occasional meteorite, and nothing's going anywhere. So we need to cycle materials forever and upcycling, creating value every time things move through the material cycle. And cradle to cradle is a great form of biomimicry, the technocycle, the biological cycle. Everybody needs to get in the mood for participating in that cycle. When it comes through your hands, all you need to do when you're done with it is move it to the next part of the cycle. If we get everybody in that habit, everything will be so much better. So much of our ecological footprint is waste and wasted. And that's just dumb. Waste is a waste. This particular mental model, this is a great example of, if you understand that we're living on a planet that has its own set of principles and laws, then we can understand the economy as a system dependent on the social and human capital, both of which are dependent on the natural capital upon which all life and all production depends. And at the end of the day, it's all powered by the sun anyway. The planet runs on sunlight and sugar, and we can take advantage of that. Here's another one that people, especially in the US, have a very difficult time with. As soon as they hear the word limit, they think loss of autonomy and scarcity. They do not think of tapping the power of limits. So we need to help them understand that limits are your friends. They're thresholds beyond which you do not want to go. You don't want to do not enough, and you don't want to do too much. You want to find that sweet spot that allows your systems to be healthy, no matter what your systems are. So that's another one that's really quite, when people hear sustainability, they immediately hear loss of autonomy. And so we need to help them understand, no, we are choosing every day. It's not a loss of autonomy. It's a great use of free will to choose to thrive over time. Here's another one. We're all in this together. We're interdependent on each other and on the natural systems upon which all life depends. Interdependence is a concept most people don't understand. And systems thinking and system dynamics tools and concepts are quite valuable and quite useful in helping people to navigate interdependence and complexity. Reciprocity rules is another great mental model, just understanding that in the context of interdependence, self-interests are best served through the development of mutually beneficial relationships. Self-interests are part of the group's interests, and the group's interests are made up of all kinds of self-interests, and understanding that reciprocal relationship is key, and operating understand that in a way that demonstrates that you understand that. And finally, for now, we're all responsible, because everything we do and everything we don't do makes a difference. And it's that second part that almost all of the people that I work with hundreds of thousands of people every year, they didn't realize that what they didn't do still made a difference. Again, seems pretty straightforward, but they didn't know. And so when people understand that they are responsible for the difference they make, they tend to take responsibility, and they read the feedback, and they self-correct, and they get engaged. So here are some of the brain-based strategies for shifting mental models. And I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time towards the end here for some Q&A. And I'm counting on Ali to let me know if there's any clarifying questions up until this point that you need addressed before you're able to listen to the rest. So somebody's going to tell me if I need to take a short hiatus here. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. So some of the brain-based strategies, there are 9 proven brain-based strategies for shifting mental models and evolving people's ability to see things that they can't see in their existing frame. One of them is experience. So it could be a simulation, a contrived experience like the fish game, or any other kinds of constructed experiences. It can be learning journeys. It could be actual experience, but that takes a lot longer. So if we want to accelerate the shift towards sustainability, we need to be designing experiences for people so that they can understand what we're trying to do and literally open up their mind. Being open-minded is what we're really talking about here. Asking different questions. You will literally see people's eyes roll in the back of their heads. When you ask a question they've never asked of themselves, they have to rewire their brains in order to even think about your question, let alone answer it. So just asking a question that someone is not asking of themselves already begins to open up their brain. Storytelling. As I mentioned earlier, storytelling is the friendliest way to rewire someone's brain, which is not brainwashing, mind you. It is increasing understanding by being able to have a plastic mind and see things that are going on that you didn't expect to see or have not seen before. So storytelling, if someone says it's impossible, if you have 2 or 3 stories of people who are already doing it, it creates cognitive dissonance in the brain, and it can't be impossible and possible at the same time. And the brain wants to reconcile that. So storytelling paints a picture and creates a new narrative for people, and it's the friendliest way in the world to do it. And so those case studies that you all collect, make them visible, make them accessible, make them doable for people. And that is the friendliest, easiest way to do it. Activate the creative process. Artists and writers and creative people do this all the time. They're constantly rewiring and reframing and thinking out of the box. That's just what they do for a living. So make sure that you've got a lot of those kinds of people on your team, and that you know how to help people get creative. Think about our thinking, metacognition. That also is a way of rewiring. Thinking about your thinking causes you to create new synapses and new cognitive connections, which will open up the mind to new thinking. Reflection, mindfulness, incredibly important contribution to keeping the brain plastic and keeping us updated. Empathizing, it's a way of perspective taking. Extremely important in this work for all kinds of reasons. We share the planet with over 7 billion people, and we need to understand one another and be able to put ourselves in one another's shoes for all kinds of reasons, including it keeps our brains moving. Again, changing perspective to increase understanding, perspective taking does create open-mindedness. And focus on the results of our own behavior and taking responsibility for the difference we make. We call it reading feedback and self-correct. So many people do not take responsibility for what's going on in the world because they have not been able to connect the dots between their own lives and their behavior and the results they see around them. They think it's somebody else. And they honestly do, because our brains are hardwired to read feedback that's right in front of us that we're used to seeing. And so we need to wake them up, and we need to help them adapt to a rapidly changing world that our brains were simply, our little reptilian brains were not designed to deal with. So we need to quickly start that. We start in pre-K. We take it right through higher ed, and then I work with corporations and governments so that everybody, it's harder to shift frames when you're older, but it is not impossible. And here's why. Some mental models are easier to shift than others. And I always use the example of Copernicus. He suffered greatly because his math was a big paradigm shift at the time. Everybody thought that everything revolved around us, and particularly the Catholic Church at that time. And when he said that it's not true, he was tortured, Galileo was tortured, it was not good. And why? Because it shifted the power, and it shifted the people's understanding of how things were organized. And it was not until 1993 that the Vatican conceded that maybe Copernicus was correct. Not because their mathematicians didn't do the same math and come up with the same conclusion, but because they needed to figure out how to brand it, how to navigate their positioning in the world as a result. And I'm not picking on them. There are many examples. It's just that you can Google that example quite quickly. The mental models, so the ease of shift for somebody to shift their mental model depends on how much their money, their status, and their identity are tied to that mental model. So if somebody is really proud of themselves for being innovative and being a change agent and being up with the times, then we can attach their status to their ability to shift and change their thinking and get to a sustainable future. If they're invested in something that's unsustainable, there's really no interest. It's only threatening for them to change their mental model. So that is something for the change agents out there to help those people who are the most threatening to not be threatened by changing. The mental models of children and young people change over time with new knowledge and applied insight. They do it naturally. They're natural learners. Again, until the age of about 13, 14, when the frames start kicking in, and then they've learned about thinking about their thinking, then they're conscious and mindful about that, then they will continue to do that. And our challenge is, do our mental models change over time with new knowledge and applied insight? Are we willing to be the lifelong learners we need to be able to thrive over time and help the next set of generations thrive over time as well? So this is our contact information. I have included an article that I've written on our blog. The link is here. Because there are a lot of things. I do a lot of work with the brain scientists now. I'm incorporating the brain science of creativity, the brain science of shifting mental models, the brain science of moral decision making. There's a lot we can learn from our little reptilian brains. And so that article is going to be quite useful for people who are working with others who need to keep their minds open, so that we can make the kind of change that we need to as quickly as possible. So I'm available. Most of my work is in professional learning and coaching and curriculum design, so that other people can do the professional learning and coaching. And I'm here for you if any of this is useful to you, and I hope it is. And I'm open to a Q&A. So I will reduce this a little bit so I can see the chat box, and hopefully some of you have something to something to ask.
Jaimie, if you look to the Q&A.
Yeah, there's 2 questions there.
Okay, can you read them to
I'll
me?
read them to you.
I don't see them yet.
So the first question, Jaimie says, so Jaimie, there is in fact a debate out there. Does thinking drive behavior as you suggest, and behavior drives results? Or is it that changing what we do is the best way of changing how we think? How do you react to that essential question?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. So, of course, the answer is yes. There is no, it's a system. There is no beginning or end. There's no one way that it happens. So the Gestalt folks would tell you, make the change and that'll change your thinking. But if you've made the change, then you've already started choosing to make the change. So you actually have started thinking differently. So it doesn't matter. Create where can you begin is where you should begin. But we always say there's no beginning or end, so start where there are favorable conditions, which usually means where you can. So if you're in a position to change people's behavior, if you're on the production line and you're asking people simply to do something differently and get different results, that will change their thinking eventually. But your thinking has already changed. If you're an educator or a professional developer or a coach, you can do these things. You can help people open up their minds so that they can think differently. I work with a lot of different people in a lot of different sectors, and I don't know how to apply all this new thinking to their particular sector. They're the best people to do that. So for me as an educator, the access I have is in helping them change their thinking. They then know how to apply that in their own context. So it just depends on who you are and where you're intervening in the system and what you have access. But both will do the trick because they influence one another. They are reciprocal.
Great. Thanks, Jaimie.
Does that help? Sure. Does that help? Is that person happy?
Yeah, I hope
Okay,
so. And
good.
if he isn't, he'll let us know. But another question that came in is, a lot of attention is spent discussing how to address the concerns of unthinking people. But how do you approach, say, a psychist who recoils at the idea?
Oh, I see.
A physicist, yeah.
A physicist
Yeah.
who recoils at the idea that
yeah.
science is, or that a system is complex,
Yeah.
it can be accurately modeled. I would hope that you don't know any physicists who think science is settled. If you know a physicist that's saying that, they're paid by somebody to say that. That's just ridiculous. Every scientist knows that we're never gonna, all we can do, as I said, is close the gap between our perception of reality and reality. This world is much more complex than we're going to be able to understand for a long, long time to come. And of course, there's no such thing as an accurate model. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And they're useful at helping us understand how we see the world, and useful at giving us some information about what's going on. But you know, Barry Richmond would be the first to say all models are wrong. But we know that's not the question. The question is, what can they teach us? How can they be useful to us in as we are having dialogue and trying to figure out what we are supposed to do? They can be helpful, and they can help us. There's so many things that models are useful for. I like them to project over time. If you put these variables together and you do more of this and less of this, let's run the model and see how it turns out. It's not that that's the truth, that it's going to actually work exactly the way the model says, but what's useful about that is that it gets your brain thinking about the fact that, oh, if we change variables, it'll turn out differently. That's the more useful, that is much more useful as a construct to change people's thinking and get them in the habit of understanding that everything we do and everything we don't do makes a difference. That'll last a lot longer than the model. So again, I would just say, you know, let me know, Barrett, if that's a satisfying answer. I'll go on to the next one, and maybe some of the first ones can come back around.
Jaimie?
Pretending from our, oh yes, go ahead.
We had before Kathy's question came in, we had a question from Anton. on the chat, and he said, please explain the
Okay.
role of self-image. I guess this was sort of clarification, but he said, please explain the role of self-image, e.g. identity, in helping and hindering adult learning.
Oh yeah. So okay. So status in the tribe is literally our survival mechanism. Where we see ourselves in the group is our survival. So if we see ourselves, for example, as a leader, as somebody who's important in the group, who people look up to, and then somebody comes along and says, you're destroying the earth and you're making it impossible for your grandchildren to thrive over time. That's a threat to my, if I'm that person, that is you're now telling me I'm not as great as I thought I was. You're telling me I'm hurting my grandchildren. So I'm immediately, so that's a threat to my understanding of who I am. So I am not going to listen to you. I am going to say, no, I am the person I think I am, and you are wrong. So it's if you threaten someone's identity and their understanding of who they are in the system, then they're just not going to listen to you, because that's a death threat. That is literally a death threat from the brain's point of view. And so they will literally ignore you, and they will make up a story for how that's not true, and they will believe it. Whereas if that same person who believes they're great and they love their grandchildren and all of that, if you can find a way to tap that identity and say, as a leader, as someone who loves your grandchildren, as someone who is important in your group, we are counting on you to understand this and take the lead and help show us how are you going to do that in your industry. You know, I work with superintendents of school systems a lot, and they are supposed to be fantastic learners because they run education systems. But if I threaten their status in the system, I'm out. So I have to tap their love of learning as the way to get them through that tricky point. Because when you get to the point of impasse, which is the point of saying, of shifting or not shifting your frame. So whatever the strategies people are using on you, there will be a point where you have to decide free won't or free will. You know, am I going to shift, which is a threatening, they call it leaving your comfort zone for a reason. It is uncomfortable to be in that place of shifting. It's disruptive. And so if you're in that place, they call it impasse. If you decide, nah, I'm not going there, I don't see any reason to go there, I don't see any point in it, I'm sticking with what I know, you'll just regress. If you push through, you get to insight. And there is a reward there. At the other end of the uncomfortable zone is insight. And that's where all the aha moments are. That's where all the happiness is. That's where all the creativity is. So there is a reward. But you have to help people see there's a reason, you know, this is going to be great for your bottom line. This is going to be great for your reputation value. This is going to be great for whatever it is they want. We have to help them make that connection, because otherwise it's just a threat. So hopefully, Anton, that addresses that question. And you can learn more. There's a wonderful article called SCARF, SCARF, written by David Rock at the Neuro Leadership Institute. And so if you want more information about that, read the SCARF article. And I allude to it, and there's a link to it in my blog article. I've taken that article and applied it to educating for sustainability. So between those two articles, I think there's a lot of deeper wisdom that you can tap. Do we go to Kathy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're attending from our local public health department. Yay! Do you have any suggestions for introducing this model in this kind of a business in the community they serve and across the departments? I do, actually. I have a friend, Jonathan Rose, and he runs a place called the Garrison Institute in addition to his architecture firm. And we have talked a lot about the marriage of mindfulness and sustainability education, particularly for public health workers and for public health folks. You know, open-mindedness and lifelong learning and systems thinking and understanding the commons and taking responsibility, all of the elements there are two documents I would recommend everybody looks at. If you go to cloudinstitute.org, one is called the Education for Sustainability Benchmarks, and that's the most comprehensive version of the new way of thinking. And then the Cloud Institute Standards and Performance Indicators is the other document. And those two documents, if you look at them together, first the benchmarks and then drill down into the more detailed version, that's the kind of thinking we're asking people to do. And so what we would do is introduce some of these new ways of thinking to the staff and the administrators, and then work with them to say, how does this apply to you? Where is this going to be most useful? What are the things that are jumping out at you as immediately useful and applicable, and let's get those started. Because when you are shifting people's thinking, if you look at the U theory, or Theory U by Otto Scharmer, we kind of combine, in our organizational change work, we combine the U theory with the innovation diffusion, and it works quite nicely. They work nicely together. But you immediately want to prototype and apply what you're learning, because otherwise those old neural pathways will just take back over, and the new ones will kind of fizzle out. You need to create new habits of mind, if you will, that are also still plastic. You never want to get stuck in any one frame. But then we would work with those folks to apply this different way of thinking in their context. So Kathy, hopefully that's useful to you. But and every different sector applies it differently. I'm working with Eileen Fisher, and they're in the women's fashion industry, and I've worked with the green architects, and public health. There's so much going on in that field that all of this is applicable. Should we go to David? That's the next one that I see.
Yep, Kathy. Thank you very much. And yeah, let's move on to David.
Okay. Thank you. Misguided values and beliefs we hold that are driving on it, which are some of the most important folks. So here's what I would say about that. It's not a problem of values. I don't know anybody that has bad values. What I see is behavior inconsistent with our values and beliefs. The belief systems maybe are driving unsustainable. The frames that I described, those frames of the Titanic and the bummer and maximize gains for self and all of those are the things driving unsustainable behavior. But those people with those frames love their children. They're not bad people. They're just operating with outdated mental models, and they were taught those mental models in school and probably in university, and then they were reinforced by their own life experience. So it's not their fault. They're just operating with outdated thinking, and we're in a paradigm shift as fundamental as the Copernican revolution. And so this is not instant orange juice. This is a mid-course correction, and we have to treat it as such. And we have to be kind to people who are having a hard time, because it's disruptive and scary to shift your whole frame and your whole way of looking at the world. Okay, so moving on to Susan. You are welcome. I'm glad it's useful. Seems to me that the corporations who are incentivized to deliver profit above all else have the most ability to make it easier for folks to behave, to create a circular economy. I couldn't agree more. If you want to make a lot of money, you should do it in a circular economy. Less waste, more money, more reputation value, more brand recognition, less risk. I have a whole list of drivers. Everybody does. Certainly ASBC does. Our current, hopefully soon to end administration aside, isn't changing the tax code to align with triple bottom line. Yeah, well, policy is everything. Again, chicken and egg. Is it do we wait for the policies, or do we educate first? Yes, we do it all, and they all influence one another over time. So yeah, sure, tax codes would be great. Seems it should be our focus for changing thinking broadly. Do you know if anyone's working on this massive government change? Well, I work mostly with local governments, and they are definitely, once you change people's thinking, they know what to do, and they can see all the different opportunities and ways of doing things differently. I don't know at the moment a lot of people working at the federal level in this area. But it works for every sector. There's no sector we don't need. There's no discipline we don't need. So I agree with you that it's a leverage point for change. And I'd love to talk to you about maybe some things we could do together on. Barrett, you're welcome. Steve, do we still have a couple more minutes? Can I go through all these? What do you think? People can sign off if they're not interested in this. What do you want to do?
If you have the time, Jaimie, and you'd like to go through them all, please
Oh,
do.
I do.
For those that are interested.
There's so many interested people on the line, and these are great questions. So I'm here if you are. Okay, Steve, there are few scientists who are clear denialists about global climate change. They're funded, yeah, of course, that's what I said. They're funded by people to say that, and rejected by peer scientists. I welcome diverse views, but they're speaking, that is not a diverse viewpoint. I would argue that's just that's something else. But their speaking introduces doubt when we all need hands on deck to address. Yes, how do we respond? So I often get asked to speak at a town meeting in which this is happening, and people are doubtful and they don't know, what's going on. And I will always get the question, prove to us there's climate change. And so here's how I handle it. So first of all, I always say, we don't let high school kids graduate high school without being able to make a reasoned argument and back it up with evidence. So tell me what peer-reviewed journals you have read. What do you know about climate change, any of you? Well, of course, nobody's read anything. They don't know anything. And I say, okay, well, so if you need help, if you've got an ulcer and you're not gonna go to the gas station to find out what to do about your ulcer. You're gonna go to the doctor, and not a foot doctor. You're gonna go to the right doctor for the right problem. If you need an oil change, you don't go to the pharmacist, you go to the gas station. If you wanna know about climate change, you're gonna go to climate scientists. That would make sense. So why is it that everybody's having such a hard time dealing with this? Well, because it's scary. Okay, let's talk about that. If you're putting people in a fear state, what the brain scientists will call an away state, then they're going to shut down and deny anything. And put aside the people paid to deny, because that is not like I said, that's not another perspective. That's just blackmail. If it's truly fear, then let's talk about how to get out of that fear state. And let's talk about how we can create a community to thrive over time. And don't let the fear override your ability to take action that creates a healthy system for your kids and your grandkids. So I immediately shift the conversation to what can we do that we all know is common sense to do anyway, and to just speak to the fear, because that's what's driving normal people's denial. If they're not being paid, to say that, they're just afraid. And you cannot think well if you're in a fear state. We are designed that way. If you're in a fear state, you're supposed to be running, fight or flight or women gather. But you're not having a creative response, because you're supposed to be running. And so we need to get people out of the fear state, assuming it's possible to have a healthy future. And, if climate change is a trigger for people, then call it a healthy community with clean water and clean air and good soil, just call it that. And that's fine. Increase the green space, decrease the pollution. It does the same thing. You don't even have to use the word climate change. Some words are triggers. We all know that. So we have to be learner centered and not try to push our agenda as much as to understand who they are and find a way to meet them where they are and then take them to a new place through learning. So hopefully, Steve, I'll catch you on the circle around. So Ashwani, hi Ashwani. Do you have any strong ways of counteracting the problem of confirmation bias? The idea that we only believe things to be true when they agree with what we already know. It's exactly what I've been saying. Those 9 brain-based strategies are the ways to do that. Confirmation bias is just the name we call for being stuck in your mental model. Your frame does that. Everything is consistent within the frame we're operating. So that's just another name for being stuck in your frame. and believing what you already know to be true. And again, that's tied to your identity, your status, and your money. So that's why it's threatening to change your frame, or why it's an opportunity to change your frame. You know, my status is based on my ability to learn. So whenever I start to shut down, like with fancy technology or something that's not easy for me to use, I say to myself, all right, now you pride yourself on your ability to learn and be a lifelong learner. So step up and learn this thing. You can do it. You know, because that's a status thing for me. If I shy away from learning something new, I am not who I think I am. So I make myself do it. And everybody can do that. It just depends on what your status is based on. But if, you know, hardly anybody would say, you know, I'm very proud of the fact that I haven't learned anything in 10 years. Nobody, I don't think, would want to say that. So if it's about learning and then making informed choices, if you put it that way, most people will say, oh, that's a good idea, especially if there's competitive advantage, if there's some other motivator, or you can be the first to do it on your block, or, you know, that works everywhere. We're still very competitive, and that's a great use of competition in my opinion. Okay, so Ashwani, hopefully that addresses that question. It's basically the same thing I've been talking about. There's the reality bubble that addresses many of the issues. Oh, that's great. I don't know that book. So thank you, David. I appreciate that. Here's Kathy. You're welcome. Christia, do you find that sharing that shifting mental models is the driving reason for something is helpful? Or do people tend to dig in when they realize you're trying to change their thinking? Oh, that's a great question. So one thing I didn't mention is that I always ask permission to blow people's minds in the very beginning. So that's a little trick I learned from the brain scientists. I tell people, look, paradigms are likely to shift in the brain. You're likely to leave your comfort zone. There is a prize at the end. If you get from impasse to insight, it will feel good eventually, but you will get cranky, tired, you know, sometimes mean, sometimes aggressive. So I'm going to put you through all that. Everybody in? And everybody says, okay. I've never had anybody say no, but I let them know up front, it's gonna be weird. And we call it lifelong learning, and we call it leaving your comfort zone, and we ask kids to do it all the time. So I make it friendly, I make it fun. But when they get to that point, you can see it in their faces. And then I say, okay, here we are. Keep going, push through to insight. And they do. So so I have just found that it's better to just let everybody know up front, this is what's going to happen. If you don't want to change your thinking, if you don't want to learn anything, this is not the session for you. So and you know, I work a lot with educators, but I also work a lot with corporate leaders and people who do at the end of the day need, even if they don't want to learn something new, they need to, and they know it. So so it's a friendly way, and it's super fun. And I'm always trying to help people, you know, not make light of it, but make it possible for people to go through that, and then get used to going through that. Because hey, this is a lot easier. Leaving your comfort zone is a lot easier than dealing with more and more indicators of unsustainability. This ain't nothing compared to what we're going to have to deal with if we don't. So hey, relatively speaking, it's fine, and you get a prize at the end. So what's not to love about that? Okay, Brenda, do you have the sustainable solution of the fish game available for people to see and potentially learn from? Gaming is such a great way to introduce the topic. Oh yeah, we have the fish game in our bookstore. You can see the whole thing and how I facilitated and all the answers, and yeah, that whole thing is there. It's in our bookstore. The other thing that's there is a deeper exploration of these mental models and the strategies that I introduced, and there are cards, and there's protocols, and there's a way that you can interact with people around the mental models, and start to learn how to recognize a mental model from what people say, because people don't know they have a mental model until they see it, and then they say, oh yeah, that's me. So yeah, we have a lot of good, useful resources in our bookstore. And I'm also happy to do some coaching or professional development and learning if I can be of any help. But if you're a do-it-yourself person, just go to the bookstore. David again. I guess what I was looking for is examples of beliefs that are having the biggest impact. For example, Is it the belief that we can have unlimited economic growth forever? Is it the belief that we're still in an empty world economy when we have moved into full world? Is it a belief that technology can solve all? By identifying the top 10, we can, I think I did identify the top 10. It's all of those. And some people have more than one, strangely, or not. Maybe that explains a lot, actually. So the ones I just shared with you, I've been doing this work for just that game for 22 years, tracking this data. And I get exactly the same responses every time, every single time. And I'm not saying they're all of the mental models of unsustainability, but those are definitely in the ethos, and that is global. I've been in China, Russia, Latin America, Europe, all over the world doing this work, and I get the same answers every time. So don't look for any one thing. A top 10, yeah. But just go back and all of those I would say are anthropocentric, and the control freak I would say are probably the uber ones that are driving even all of the rest of them. But so if you want some top hitters, those would be them. But those other ones are the classic ones that are driving everything. And so in that protocol I just mentioned called Understanding Mental Models, we have a chart. We've done our best to identify which mental models of sustainability are antidotes to the ones of unsustainability, and which strategies we think might be the best ones for that particular shift. So that's more of an art than a science, figuring out which strategies will work the best. But we have identified what we think are the opposites, the antidotes. And so you might want to get that protocol and play around with that. And then see in your organization, if you were to play the fish game, you can see which ones are driving. You'll probably have the same results that I get. And then when you ask people, why did you do it? They will tell you why. And then you can start there. So with your clients, that might be a place to start. But there's no magic bullet. There's no one thing. But those are the top 10 or 12 mental models out there that coincide, that I get, that coincide with the literature out there. You can just see that those frames operating in everything that's unsustainable. You can see them operating, especially in some of those neoclassical economic policies and practices and concepts and tools. Okay, Josette. So David, come back around if I still didn't quite answer your question. Josette, you referred to artists as leaders of the creative process. They're in a position to make a difference. Do you believe there should be a focused effort to educate and engage artists in educating for sustainability, or should their involvement remain more generic? Oh, I would say definitely that they are leverage points, but only because it's not threatening for them to think out of the box. They do that for a living. That's who they are. And so you already jumped over that hoop if you're working with them. So yeah, I would say if you have access to artists, go for it. You know, I chose school systems as one of my primary target audiences because all the children and young people are legally required to be there for 13 years. Not because they're the easiest organizations to change or because I even think they're a great place to be, but because if you're going to require all the children and young people to be in a building for 13 years, something's going to happen to them in that time. And I would rather it be that they are prepared to lead with us the shift toward a sustainable future. That seems like a great use of that time. If they're stuck there anyway, I'm going to be stuck there with them. So that's why I work with school systems a lot. But you know, but business is a leverage point. David Levine runs American Sustainable Business Council. That, you know, you guys, ASBC, is business is a leverage point. So there are lots of them, and artists certainly are. And there's no such thing as generic. So so there that is. So Catherine, and again, Josette, let me know if that's satisfying. And Catherine Hayho answered numerous questions of Bill Moyer. She explains those who oppose action on climate primarily do not like the solution, which is
Is anyone else able to hear Jaimie? Someone write in the chat box. All right, sorry about that, everyone. It looks like she got disconnected. Well, we're getting near the last question here. John, if you could, or sorry, the last question was, yeah, from John, if you could post your email, I'll get it to Jaimie and she can hopefully answer your question over email. But other than that, thank you everyone so much for attending. If you're interested in discussing these topics more or collaborating with us, you can reach out to us. Websites on ASPC's, or sorry, emails are on ASPC's website. And thank you very much. Oh yes, you're asking how to access the recording. Here, I'll post it one more time. It'll be on ASPC's website by tomorrow. And there is the link right there. All right, thank you everybody. Have a good day and talk to you soon.